3 days before our long-awaited romantic getaway to Napa Valley, Sarah called me with news that made my stomach drop. She was canceling our weekend retreat to join Jake, her new fishing guide, on what she called the fishing expedition of a lifetime on the Columbia River. This was the third time she'd done this to me. The third time she'd chosen adventure over us. What she didn't know was that while she was downstairs at the marina celebrating her catch of the day, I was upstairs, at the same resort, getting engaged to someone who actually knew how to value my heart. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. You see, Sarah and I had been together for 4 years, and I thought I knew her inside and out. We'd met during our junior year at Portland State University when she was struggling through her business management course. She was brilliant at everything else, but numbers and financial planning made her freeze up completely. I'd spent countless nights helping her understand profit margins and business strategies, sometimes staying up until 3 in the morning, just to make sure she'd pass her exams. When she finally graduated with honors, she threw her arms around me and said she'd never forget what I'd done for her. That was Sarah back then, grateful and sweet, with this laugh that could light up an entire room. She had these green eyes that sparkled when she got excited about something. She'd always grab my hand when she was nervous or happy. I fell hard for her, the kind of love where you start planning your future together without even realizing it. After graduation, we moved in together to a cozy apartment in downtown Portland. She joined her family's outdoor equipment business, and I started working at my dad's struggling marketing agency. The first sign something was changing came 2 years into our relationship. We'd planned this incredible trip to Cabo San Lucas for our anniversary. I'd saved up for months, researching the perfect beachfront resort, booking excursions, even learning basic Spanish phrases to impress her. 3 days before we were supposed to leave, Sarah came home with this guilty expression I'd never seen. Before, she'd met this adventure photographer at work who was organizing a rock climbing expedition in Joshua Tree that same weekend. The opportunity was too good to pass up, she said. It was a chance to network with serious outdoor enthusiasts and potentially land some major contracts for her family's business. I was disappointed but tried to be understanding. Business opportunities don't come around every day, and I knew how important her career was to her. We rescheduled for the following month, and I convinced myself it was just bad timing. But that rescheduled trip never happened either because Sarah got caught up in launching a new product line that required her constant attention. The second major cancellation happened last year when I'd planned the most romantic getaway I could imagine to Paris. I'd been working extra hours for 6 months to afford it, coordinating with her schedule, learning French phrases, and even picking out a special restaurant near the Eiffel Tower where I was seriously considering proposing. But 2 weeks before our departure, Sarah discovered this wilderness survival expert who was conducting an exclusive training course in the Oregon mountains. She said it was exactly what she needed to understand her customers better and that the connections she'd make could transform her family's business. Again, I swallowed my disappointment and told myself I was being supportive. That's what partners do, right? They sacrifice for each other's dreams and ambitions. I canceled the Paris reservations, lost the deposits, and watched Sarah pack her hiking gear with more enthusiasm than I'd seen her show for any of our planned romantic trips. During that survival course, she met Jake. He was the lead instructor. This ruggedly handsome guy in his early 30s who specialized in fishing and wilderness navigation. Sarah came back from that weekend completely energized, talking nonstop about Jake's expertise and how he'd taught her to read river currents and identify the best fishing spots. She started following him on social media, signing up for his weekend workshops, gradually spending more and more of her free time learning outdoor skills that had nothing to do with her actual job. At first, I thought it was just a phase. Sarah had always been the type to dive headfirst into new interests before moving on to something else. But Jake wasn't just a passing fascination. He became a constant presence in our conversations. Sarah would bring up something Jake had said about sustainable fishing practices, or mention how Jake had this incredible ability to find hidden fishing spots that most guides never discovered. She'd show me photos from their group expeditions, always pointing out how patient and knowledgeable Jake was with beginners. I started feeling uncomfortable when Sarah began canceling our regular date nights to attend Jake's evening seminars about river ecology and fishing techniques. When I expressed concern about how much time she was spending on this new hobby, Sarah would get defensive and accuse me of being unsupportive of her personal growth. She said I was being possessive and that she needed space to explore her interests. Without feeling guilty about it, the situation escalated when my family's marketing agency hit serious financial trouble. We'd lost 3 major clients in 2 months. My dad was talking about potentially having to close the business that had been in our family for over 15 years. The only hope we had was landing a partnership with Sarah's family company, which could provide us with steady contract work and help us rebuild our client base. I'd never wanted to mix our personal relationship with business, but the stakes were too high to ignore. When I finally gathered the courage to talk to Sarah about the possibility of our families working together, she seemed distracted and uninterested. She said she'd think about it but never brought it up again. Meanwhile, she was spending every weekend with Jake's fishing group, posting photos of their adventures, coming home with stories about the incredible natural spots Jake had shown them. The breaking point came when I planned what I hoped would be our perfect romantic getaway to Napa Valley. I had researched every detail, booking us a suite at the Riverside Resort and Spa with couples massages, private wine tastings, and dinner reservations at restaurants I knew Sarah would love. I'd even arranged for a sunset hot air balloon ride over the vineyards, something she'd mentioned wanting to try years ago. This trip was my attempt to reconnect with the Sarah I'd fallen in love with, and maybe even find the right moment to have a serious conversation about our future together. But when I told Sarah about the Napa Valley plans, her reaction wasn't the excitement I'd expected. She seemed pleased but not thrilled, and I noticed she kept checking her phone throughout our conversation. Later that evening, I discovered why. Jake had just announced a special 3-day fishing expedition on the Columbia River that same weekend, and Sarah was already mentally planning to join him instead of coming away with me. The way she told me about her decision still makes my chest tighten when I think about it. She didn't apologize or seem conflicted about canceling our romantic plans. Instead, she explained how this particular fishing trip was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity because Jake was taking them to exclusive spots that he rarely shared with anyone. She said I should understand how important this was for her personal development and that we could always reschedule Napa Valley for another time. Standing there in our apartment, listening to Sarah prioritize another adventure with Jake over our relationship, I realized something had fundamentally shifted between us. This wasn't about her needing space to grow or explore new interests. This was about her consistently choosing someone else's company over mine. And I was tired of always being the understanding boyfriend who accommodated every cancellation and disappointment. But what happened next would change everything in ways I never could have imagined. That Friday morning, I watched Sarah pack her fishing gear with more enthusiasm than she'd shown for anything involving us in months. She carefully organized her tackle box, checked her waterproof boots twice, and spent 20 minutes selecting the perfect outdoor outfit for her expedition with Jake. Meanwhile, our Napa Valley reservations sat canceled in my email inbox, another romantic gesture reduced to nothing. The way Sarah moved around our apartment that morning, humming softly while she prepared for her adventure, made something inside me snap. She wasn't conflicted about her choice. She wasn't apologetic about disappointing me again. She was genuinely excited to spend the weekend with Jake, and I was just an obstacle she'd successfully navigated around. When she kissed my cheek goodbye and said she'd bring me back some photos of the fish they caught, I realized she had no idea how deeply she'd hurt me. After Sarah left, I called the Riverside Resort and Spa to officially cancel our romantic suite. The receptionist's sympathetic tone when I explained the situation made me feel even worse. But then something unexpected happened. The manager, a woman named Patricia, came on the line and said something that would change everything. She mentioned that they had a last-minute corporate event that same weekend, retreat for successful young entrepreneurs, and they were actually overbooked. A cancellation had saved them from a difficult situation, and she wanted to offer me something in return. Patricia explained that one of their retreat attendees, travel blogger and business owner, had specifically requested someone with marketing expertise to help document the weekend for her social media platforms. The job paid well, included accommodation and meals, and would put me in contact with potential clients who might be interested in my family's marketing services. It seemed like exactly the kind of opportunity we desperately needed. I almost turned it down. The idea of spending the weekend at the same resort where Sarah and I were supposed to be having our romantic getaway felt like torture. But then I thought about my dad's worried expression when he talked about potentially losing the business. And I knew I couldn't pass up this chance. I packed a bag, drove to Napa Valley, and tried to convince myself that work was exactly what I needed to distract myself from Sarah's betrayal. The riverside resort was even more beautiful than the photos had suggested. Rolling vineyards stretched in every direction, and the main building had this rustic elegance that would have been perfect for the romantic weekend I'd planned. Walking through the lobby with my laptop bag instead of Sarah's hand in mine felt surreal, like I was living in an alternate version of my life. The corporate retreat turned out to be more interesting than I'd expected. The attendees were mostly successful women entrepreneurs in their 20s and 30s, all driven and passionate about their businesses. But it was Emma who immediately caught my attention, though I couldn't quite figure out why she seemed familiar. She was the travel blogger who'd requested marketing help, petite brunette with an infectious smile and this confident energy that filled whatever room she entered. Emma ran a hugely successful travel and lifestyle blog called Wanderlust and Wonder, with over 500,000 followers across her social platforms. She specialized in unique romantic getaways and experiential travel, exactly the kind of content that required sophisticated marketing strategies. As we discussed her needs for the weekend, I found myself genuinely excited about a project for the first time in months. What surprised me most about Emma was how attentive she was during our conversations. She asked thoughtful questions about my marketing background, listened carefully to my ideas, and seemed genuinely interested in my perspective. It was such a contrast to recent interactions with Sarah, where I often felt like I was competing with her phone for her attention. Emma put her device away when we talked and maintained eye contact in a way that made me feel heard and valued. During our first working session, Emma mentioned that she was documenting this particular retreat because she was considering a major business expansion into corporate event planning and luxury group experiences. She wanted to capture every detail of how the weekend unfolded, from the welcome reception to the planned activities, and she needed someone who understood both visual storytelling and strategic marketing to help her create content that would attract high-end clients. As we worked together that first afternoon, I found myself laughing more than I had in weeks. Emma had this dry sense of humor and would make these clever observations about the other retreat attendees that were hilarious but never mean-spirited. She also had this way of building on my marketing ideas that made our collaboration feel effortless and productive. By evening, we'd created a comprehensive content strategy that exceeded both of our initial expectations. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. That night, at the welcome dinner, I couldn't help but think about how different this felt from the evenings I'd spent watching Sarah scroll through Jake's social media posts. Emma was fully present, engaging with everyone around the table, and she kept including me in conversations in a way that made me feel like a valued partner rather than an afterthought. When she laughed at something I said, it felt genuine and warm, not polite or distracted. The second day of the retreat included a group activity at a nearby vineyard, and Emma asked me to document the experience from both a participant and marketing perspective. As we walked through the vineyard together, taking photos and discussing content strategy, she started asking more personal questions about my background and my family's business. When I explained the financial difficulties we were facing, Emma listened with genuine concern and offered several concrete suggestions for potential clients and partnerships. It was during that vineyard walk that Emma made a comment that stopped me in my tracks. She mentioned that she'd actually grown up in Portland and had attended Portland State University for her undergraduate degree before moving to San Francisco to build her business. Something about the way she said it, combined with her familiar smile, triggered a memory that I'd completely forgotten. Suddenly, I remembered a shy, bookish girl from my sophomore year who'd approached me after a marketing class, asking for help with a presentation she was terrified to give. I'd spent an afternoon helping her practice, building her confidence, and making sure she felt prepared. She'd been so grateful that she'd written me this incredibly sweet thank you note, but I'd never seen her again after that semester. Looking at Emma's confident, successful demeanor now, it was hard to believe she was the same nervous college student I'd helped all those years ago. When I tentatively asked if she remembered me from Portland State, Emma's face lit up with the most beautiful smile I'd ever seen. She said she'd been wondering all weekend if I would remember her, and that helping her with that presentation had been a turning point in her academic confidence. She'd wanted to thank me properly at the time, but I'd disappeared from her life before she had the chance. When she'd seen my name on the marketing consultant list for this retreat, she'd specifically requested to work with me, hoping it was the same Marcus who'd been so kind to her in college. The revelation that Emma had remembered me after all these years and had specifically sought out my help felt like something out of a movie. Here was someone who'd carried gratitude for a small kindness I'd shown her years ago, while Sarah couldn't even appreciate the major sacrifices I'd made for our relationship on a regular basis. The contrast was stark and honestly devastating. That evening, Emma and I worked late into the night, refining her content strategy and discussing potential collaborations between her business and my family's agency. She was impressed by my strategic thinking and creativity, and she made it clear that she wanted to hire us for several upcoming projects that could significantly help our financial situation. But more than the business opportunity, I was struck by how easy and natural our conversation felt. We talked about everything from travel dreams to family relationships to career aspirations, and I realized I hadn't felt this intellectually and emotionally connected to someone in years. As the weekend progressed, I found myself dreading the moment when I'd have to return to Portland and face Sarah's inevitable enthusiasm about her fishing expedition with Jake. Emma represented everything I'd been missing in my relationship, qualities I hadn't even realized I was starving for. She was ambitious but considerate, adventurous but reliable, and she had this way of making me feel like the best version of myself. On our final evening at the resort, Emma and I sat on the terrace overlooking the vineyards, discussing the successful content we'd created and the business partnership we'd established. The conversation gradually became more personal, and Emma admitted that she'd been hesitant to reach out to me over the years, because she'd assumed I was probably married or in a serious relationship. When I mentioned Sarah and our complicated situation, Emma listened without judgment, but with obvious concern. She asked me directly whether I was happy in my relationship, and for the first time in months, I gave an honest answer. I told her about the pattern of canceled plans, the way Sarah prioritized other people's company over mine, and how isolated and unappreciated I'd been feeling. Emma's response was both gentle and eye-opening. She said that, from an outside perspective, it sounded like Sarah was taking advantage of my loyalty and keeping me around as a safety net while she explored other connections. That night, lying in the beautiful resort room that should have been the setting for a romantic weekend with Sarah, I finally allowed myself to acknowledge what I'd been avoiding for months. Our relationship was over, not because of one dramatic betrayal, but because of 1,000 small moments where Sarah had shown me that I wasn't her priority. Emma's presence in my life had illuminated just how much I'd been settling for, and how much more I deserved. The next morning, as the retreat came to an end, Emma and I exchanged contact information and made concrete plans for our business collaboration. But there was something else hanging in the air between us, an emotional connection that went far beyond professional partnership. Emma mentioned that she was planning to spend the next few weeks in Portland, working on a series about Pacific Northwest travel destinations, and she asked if I'd be interested in showing her some of the hidden gems around the city. As I drove back to Portland that Sunday evening, I felt like I was returning as a completely different person than the one who'd left 3 days earlier. I had new business prospects that could save my family's company, a rekindled connection with someone who genuinely valued and appreciated me, and most importantly, a clear understanding of what I wanted my future to look like. Sarah's fishing expedition with Jake suddenly seemed like exactly what it was, the final confirmation that we wanted completely different things from life and love. When I walked into our apartment Sunday night, Sarah was already there, spread across the couch with her laptop open, uploading photos from her fishing expedition. She looked up with this radiant smile, the kind I hadn't seen directed at me in months, and immediately launched into an animated recap of her weekend adventures with Jake and his group. She showed me picture after picture of their catches, the scenic river spots they'd discovered, and candid shots of the group laughing around their campfire. In every photo, Sarah looked genuinely happy and carefree in a way that made my stomach clench. She'd found exactly what she was looking for that weekend, and it had nothing to do with me. What struck me most was how she described Jake's guidance and expertise with this reverent tone, like he was some kind of fishing sage who'd opened her eyes to a whole new world. When Sarah finally paused her enthusiastic storytelling to ask about my weekend, I could see she was expecting me to be sulking or resentful about the canceled Napa Valley trip. Instead, I told her about the marketing opportunity I'd taken at the resort, the successful business connections I'd made, and the potential contracts that could help save my family's agency. Sarah's reaction was telling. She seemed surprised that I'd turned the weekend into something productive rather than wallowing in disappointment. And her congratulations felt perfunctory, like she was already mentally moving on to other topics. Over the next few days, the distance between us became even more apparent. Sarah continued to text Jake throughout our conversations, sharing inside jokes about their fishing expedition and making plans for future outdoor adventures. She'd gotten this new habit of comparing everything to Jake's approach or expertise. When we went to dinner, she'd mentioned how Jake had told the group about sustainable fishing practices. When we watched a nature documentary, she'd referenced something Jake had taught them about reading weather patterns. It was like Jake had become the measuring stick for everything interesting or worthwhile in her world. Meanwhile, Emma had started her Portland project and had been texting me regularly about potential collaboration opportunities. Her messages were professional but warm, and she'd begun asking for recommendations about local spots that would work well for her travel content. I found myself looking forward to her texts in a way that made me realize how rarely I felt excited about communicating with Sarah anymore. The breaking point came on Thursday evening when I was at my parents' house, helping my dad review potential client proposals and discussing strategy for saving the agency. My mom had prepared this elaborate dinner as a way of thanking me for bringing in the EMA connection and the potential new business it represented. We were in the middle of a serious conversation about restructuring the company when Sarah called, clearly expecting me to drop everything to listen to her latest Jake story. She'd just gotten back from another impromptu fishing lesson with Jake, this time at a different river location, and she was bubbling with excitement about some advanced technique he'd taught her. When I explained that I was in the middle of important family business discussions and asked if we could talk later, Sarah's tone immediately shifted. She accused me of being dismissive and unsupportive, saying that I never showed genuine interest in the things that mattered to her. The irony of her complaint was so stunning that I actually laughed out loud, which only made her angrier. Here, she was criticizing me for not being available to celebrate her fishing adventures, while she'd spent months prioritizing Jake's company over our relationship and had literally canceled our romantic getaway to spend more time with him. When I pointed this out, Sarah became defensive and accused me of being jealous and possessive. But what really shattered something inside me was what she said next. Sarah told me that Jake had been asking about our relationship and had expressed concern that I seemed controlling and unsupportive of her personal growth. According to Sarah, Jake thought it was unhealthy how I expected her to prioritize our relationship over her individual interests and development. She said Jake had helped her realize that she needed to establish better boundaries with me and focus more on her own happiness and fulfillment. Hearing that Sarah had been discussing our private relationship issues with Jake, and that he'd been actively encouraging her to distance herself from me, felt like a betrayal that went beyond anything I'd experienced before. This wasn't just about Sarah choosing fishing over romance anymore. This was about her allowing another man to influence and undermine our relationship, while positioning himself as her advisor and confidant. That night, I sat in my childhood bedroom at my parents' house, staring at my phone and trying to process what was happening to my life. Sarah had sent a follow-up text saying she needed space to think about whether our relationship was really what she wanted, and that maybe we should consider taking a break while she figured out her priorities. The casual way she suggested potentially ending our 4-year relationship via text message. Right after defending Jake's opinion about our problems, it made me realize that I'd been clinging to something that was already dead. I looked around my old room, at the awards and photos from high school and college, and remembered who I used to be before I became someone who apologized for having expectations in a relationship. I thought about Emma's genuine appreciation for the small kindness I'd shown her years ago, and how refreshing it had been to feel valued and respected by someone who saw the best in me rather than constantly finding fault. That's when I made the decision that would change everything. Instead of fighting for a relationship with someone who clearly didn't want to be in it, I was going to let Sarah go and focus on building something real with someone who actually appreciated what I had to offer. I picked up my phone and sent Emma a message, asking if she'd like to have dinner the next evening to discuss some ideas I had for expanding our business collaboration. Emma's response came back within minutes, enthusiastic and warm, suggesting a cozy restaurant in downtown Portland that specialized in Pacific Northwest cuisine. She said she'd been hoping we could spend more time together, both professionally and personally, and that she had some exciting proposals to share with me as well. The contrast between Emma's immediate availability and genuine interest versus Sarah's reluctance to prioritize our relationship couldn't have been more stark. The next morning, I woke up feeling lighter and more optimistic than I had in months. I spent the day working on new marketing proposals, researching Emma's business model, and preparing for what felt like the beginning of something important. When Sarah texted around noon asking if I'd thought about what she'd said regarding taking a break, I replied honestly that I thought it was exactly what we both needed. What I didn't tell Sarah was that I'd already moved beyond thinking of this as a temporary break. I was ready to end our relationship permanently and pursue something authentic with someone who genuinely wanted to be with me. The relief I felt after making this decision was confirmation that I'd been staying in a situation that was wrong for both of us, out of habit and fear rather than love and mutual respect. That evening, I met Emma at the restaurant she'd suggested, an intimate place with exposed brick walls and soft lighting that created the perfect atmosphere for the conversation I hoped we were going to have. Emma had dressed up for the occasion, wearing this elegant navy dress that highlighted her eyes. She'd clearly put thought into her appearance in a way that made me feel special and anticipated. Over dinner, we discussed the marketing proposals I'd developed for her business expansion, and Emma was genuinely impressed by the strategic thinking and creative concepts I'd put together. She explained that she'd been looking for exactly this kind of partnership, someone who understood both her brand and her ambitious goals for growth. But as the evening progressed, our conversation naturally shifted from business to personal topics, and I found myself opening up about my relationship situation in a way that felt both vulnerable and liberating. Emma listened without judgment, as I explained the pattern of disappointments and the growing distance between Sarah and me. She asked thoughtful questions that helped me articulate feelings I'd been struggling to understand, and her perspective on healthy relationship dynamics was both insightful and validating. When I mentioned that Sarah had suggested taking a break, Emma's expression became more serious, and she asked directly whether that was something I actually wanted. For the first time in months, I gave a completely honest answer about my relationship. I told Emma that I'd realized I was staying with Sarah out of comfort and fear of change rather than because we brought out the best in each other. I admitted that meeting Emma had shown me what it felt like to be with someone who genuinely appreciated and valued me, and that I couldn't go back to settling for less than that kind of connection. Emma's response was both gentle and direct. She said she'd felt the same connection between us and had been hoping I would recognize that we had something special worth exploring. She admitted that she'd specifically chosen Portland for her travel project partly because she'd wanted an excuse to spend more time with me and see where our relationship might lead. The honesty and vulnerability in her admission made me realize that this was exactly the kind of authentic communication I'd been missing with Sarah. By the end of that dinner, Emma and I had acknowledged that we wanted to pursue both a business, partnership, and a personal relationship. We talked about taking things slowly and building something solid together, based on mutual respect and genuine compatibility, rather than just convenience or habit. As I walked Emma back to her hotel that night, holding her hand and feeling truly excited about the future for the first time in months, I knew I'd made the right decision about ending things with Sarah. The next morning I called Sarah and asked to meet in person to have a serious conversation about our relationship. I decided to be completely honest about my feelings and my decision to move forward without her. Rather than pretending that a temporary break might solve our fundamental incompatibility, it was time to stop prolonging something that had already ended and start building the life I actually wanted. Sarah agreed to meet me at our favorite coffee shop downtown. It's the same place where we'd had our first official date 4 years ago. When she walked in, she looked confident and relaxed, probably expecting another conversation about taking a break or working through our issues. She had no idea that I'd already made my decision and was ready to walk away from everything we'd built together. I'd spent the morning preparing for this conversation, thinking through exactly what I wanted to say and how I wanted to handle her inevitable attempts to manipulate the situation. Sarah had always been skilled at turning arguments around, making me feel guilty for having reasonable expectations, and convincing me that I was being unreasonable or selfish. But after my dinner with Emma and the clarity I'd gained about what I actually wanted from a relationship, I felt emotionally prepared for whatever Sarah might throw at me. Sarah ordered her usual vanilla latte and settled into the chair across from me with this expectant expression, like she was waiting for me to apologize or beg her to reconsider the break she'd suggested. Instead, I looked her directly in the eyes and told her that I'd decided to end our relationship permanently. The shock on her face was immediate and obvious. She'd clearly expected me to fight for us or try to convince her to give our relationship another chance. Her first response was to laugh. Actually laugh, like the idea of me ending things with her was absurd. She said I was being dramatic and that everyone goes through rough patches in long-term relationships. Sarah suggested that I was overreacting to her friendship with Jake and that I needed to learn to be more secure and supportive of her interests. She reminded me that she'd never actually cheated on me and that I was throwing away for years over what she called innocent outdoor activities. But when she realized I was serious, Sarah's demeanor shifted completely. She started bringing up all the ways she'd supported me over the years, reminding me of times when she'd been there for me during difficult periods, and pointing out that my family's financial problems meant I needed her family's business connections. Now more than ever, she said, I was making a huge mistake that would hurt not just me, but my entire family, and that I'd regret giving up the security and stability our relationship provided. What struck me most about Sarah's arguments was how transactional they sounded. She wasn't talking about love or emotional connection or the life we'd planned together. She was talking about practical benefits and mutual obligations, like our relationship was a business partnership that would be costly to dissolve. The absence of any real emotional appeal or genuine effort to understand why I was unhappy confirmed that I was making the right choice. When Sarah realized that her practical arguments weren't working, she tried a different approach. She started crying, saying that she'd been taking me for granted and that she was ready to prioritize our relationship over her outdoor adventures. She promised that she'd stop spending so much time with Jake and that we could plan another romantic getaway. To replace the Napa Valley trip she'd canceled, Sarah swore that she'd learned her lesson and would never put her hobbies before our relationship again. But her tears felt calculated rather than genuine, and her promises sounded like negotiating tactics rather than heartfelt commitments. After months of being dismissed and deprioritized, I couldn't trust that Sarah's sudden change of heart was real or lasting. More importantly, I'd already experienced what it felt like to be with someone who valued and appreciated me naturally without having to be convinced or threatened into treating me well. I told Sarah that I appreciated her willingness to change, but that I'd already moved on emotionally and couldn't pretend to feel something I didn't anymore. When she asked if there was someone else, I was honest about meeting Emma and recognizing that I deserved to be with someone who chose me consistently rather than someone who only fought for me when they were about to lose me. Sarah's reaction to learning about Emma was explosive. She accused me of cheating on her. Even though I explained that nothing physical had happened between Emma and me while Sarah and I were still together, she said I'd been emotionally unfaithful, and that I'd probably been planning to leave her for Emma all along. Sarah demanded to know who Emma was and how we'd met, becoming increasingly agitated when I refused to provide details about my new relationship. What bothered Sarah most seemed to be the idea that I'd found someone else so quickly after she'd suggested taking a break. She said it proved that I'd never really loved her and that I was just looking for an excuse to leave. The irony of her accusation was stunning, considering that she'd been emotionally investing in Jake for months while expecting me to wait patiently for her to figure out what she wanted. Our conversation ended with Sarah storming out of the coffee shop, saying that I'd made the biggest mistake of my life and that I'd come crawling back to her within a month. She predicted that whatever I thought I had with Emma wouldn't last, and that I'd realized too late what I'd given up. Her parting shot was that she'd make sure her family never did business with my family's agency, essentially threatening to destroy the marketing opportunities I'd been counting on to save our company. Sitting alone in that coffee shop after Sarah left, I felt a mixture of relief and anxiety. Relief because I'd finally ended a relationship that had been making me miserable for months. Anxiety because Sarah's threat about blocking business opportunities could seriously hurt my family's financial situation. But even with those concerns, I knew I'd made the right choice. I couldn't build a future with someone who saw our relationship as leverage to get what she wanted. That evening, I called Emma and told her about my conversation with Sarah. Emma was supportive and understanding, acknowledging that ending a long-term relationship was never easy, even when it was the right decision. She suggested that we take a few days to let the dust settle before we spent time together, giving me space to process the end of my relationship without immediately jumping into something new. Emma's thoughtfulness about the timing and emotional complexity of my situation was another confirmation that I'd made the right choice. She was considering my feelings and well-being rather than just pursuing what she wanted, which was exactly the kind of consideration Sarah had never shown me. We made plans to have dinner the following weekend, giving me time to adjust to being single and to deal with whatever fallout might come from Sarah's threat about business consequences. Over the next few days, I focused on work and family, throwing myself into developing marketing strategies and client proposals that could help save our agency. Regardless of whether Sarah's family chose to work with us, I also spent time with my parents explaining the situation and preparing them for the possibility that we might need to find alternative solutions to our financial problems. My parents were surprisingly supportive of my decision to end things. With Sarah, they'd noticed how unhappy I'd been and had been concerned about the way Sarah had been treating me, even though they'd never said anything directly. My mom said she'd been hoping I would realize that I deserved better than someone who took me for granted. And my dad admitted that he'd never felt comfortable with the idea of mixing business with our personal relationships anyway. On Friday evening, exactly 1 week after my conversation with Sarah, I was at home preparing for my weekend dinner with Emma when I heard a commotion outside. Looking out the window, I saw Sarah's car parked in our driveway, and she was standing on the front porch with Jake beside her. They were both dressed up, and Sarah was holding a bottle of wine like they were planning to celebrate something. I opened the door to find Sarah smiling brightly, acting like nothing had happened between us. She introduced Jake as if I'd never met him before, saying that they'd just finished an amazing day of fishing and wanted to share a celebratory drink with me. Jake extended his hand for a handshake, playing along with Sarah's charade, and I could see the smugness in his expression as he looked me up and down. Sarah's plan was obvious. She brought Jake to our apartment, dressed up and acting intimate, to make me jealous and show me what I was missing. She probably expected me to get upset or territorial, giving her an opportunity to point out how unreasonable and possessive I was being. Instead, I invited them both inside and offered to get glasses for the wine, treating them exactly like the casual acquaintances they were pretending to be. The confusion on Sarah's face when I didn't react with jealousy or anger was almost comical. She'd clearly expected a different response, and my polite friendliness was throwing off her entire strategy. Jake seemed equally puzzled by my lack of emotional reaction, and I could see him trying to figure out how to provoke the confrontation he'd probably been expecting. As Sarah and Jake sat on my couch, sharing stories about their fishing adventures, and acting like a couple celebrating their success, I felt nothing but mild amusement at the transparency of their performance. Sarah kept glancing at me, clearly waiting for me to show some sign of distress or jealousy, but I was genuinely unbothered by their obvious connection. If anything, seeing them together confirmed that I'd made the right decision about ending our relationship. After about an hour of their awkward celebration, during which Sarah became increasingly frustrated by my lack of emotional response, I casually mentioned that I had dinner plans and needed to start getting ready. When Sarah asked who I was having dinner with, I told her honestly that I was taking Emma to a new restaurant that had just opened downtown. The change in Sarah's expression was immediate and dramatic. She'd clearly expected me to be sitting at home alone, pining for her while she flaunted her new relationship with Jake. Instead, I was moving on with someone new, someone she knew nothing about, and I was obviously happy and excited about it. Jake looked confused and slightly threatened, probably realizing that his strategy of swooping in as Sarah's rebound wasn't having the effect he'd anticipated. Sarah's mask of casual friendship finally slipped completely. She demanded to know who Emma was, how long I'd been seeing her, and whether I'd been planning to leave her for Emma all along. Her questions were accusatory and possessive, revealing that she'd never actually been okay with our breakup and had been hoping I'd come crawling back to her. I stood up and walked toward the door, indicating that it was time for them to leave. I told Sarah that my personal life was no longer her concern and that I hoped she and Jake would be very happy together. The dismissive way I said it, without any trace of bitterness or jealousy, seemed to infuriate her more than any argument could have. As they left, Sarah turned back one more time to say that she hoped I realized what I was giving up and that Emma would never understand or appreciate me the way she had. Jake added that he thought I was making a huge mistake and that Sarah was an amazing woman who deserved better than someone who couldn't commit to fighting for their relationship. Watching them walk away together, I felt nothing but relief that I'd escaped a situation that would have made me miserable for years. Sarah had shown me exactly who she was and what she valued, and I was grateful that I'd finally been brave enough to believe her and walk away. Tomorrow night, I'd be having dinner with someone who actually wanted to be with me, and that felt like the beginning of something wonderful rather than the end of something important. My dinner with Emma that Saturday night was everything I'd hoped it would be. We went to Clyde Common, this trendy restaurant in the Pearl District that Emma had researched specifically for our date. She'd chosen it because of their farm-to-table concept and intimate atmosphere, showing the same thoughtfulness she brought to everything else in her life. When I arrived, Emma was already waiting at our table, looking stunning in a burgundy dress that complemented her dark hair perfectly. The conversation flowed effortlessly from the moment I sat down. Emma had prepared thoughtful questions about my family's business, my long-term career goals, and my thoughts on potentially relocating if the right opportunity arose. She listened intently to my responses, asked follow-up questions that showed she was genuinely interested in understanding my perspective, and shared her own ambitions and dreams with equal openness. Over dinner, Emma explained that her travel blog had reached a point where she could expand into consulting and event planning, potentially opening an office in Portland to serve Pacific Northwest clients. She'd been looking for a marketing partner who understood both her brand and the local market, and she believed our professional collaboration could grow into something significant for both of our careers. But what made the evening truly special was how naturally we connected on a personal level. Emma shared stories about her travels that were funny and insightful. She had this way of making me feel like my own experiences and observations were equally interesting and valuable. When I told her about my passion for photography, something I'd hardly mentioned to Sarah in recent years, Emma immediately suggested we explore some scenic locations around Portland together, combining her need for content with my creative interests. As we talked, I realized that Emma brought out aspects of my personality that had been dormant for months. With Sarah, I'd become cautious and accommodating, always trying to avoid conflict or disappointment. With Emma, I felt confident and articulate, able to express my opinions and ideas without worrying about being dismissed or criticized. The contrast was striking and liberating. After dinner, we walked through the Pearl District, stopping at a wine bar where Emma wanted to continue our conversation. She asked me directly about my relationship with Sarah, not in a jealous or possessive way, because she wanted to understand what I'd learned from that experience and what I was looking for moving forward. I found myself being more honest about my feelings and needs than I'd been in years. Emma's response to my vulnerability was exactly what I'd hoped for. She acknowledged that ending a long-term relationship required courage, that she respected my decision to prioritize my happiness over convenience or familiarity. She also shared that she'd been in a similar situation 2 years earlier, staying in a relationship that wasn't fulfilling because it felt safe and predictable, until she realized that settling for less than what she wanted was preventing her from finding something real. By the end of the evening, Emma and I had established that we wanted to pursue both our professional partnership and our personal connection. We talked about taking things at a pace that felt comfortable for both of us, building a foundation of trust and compatibility rather than rushing into something intense. When I walked Emma back to her hotel, she kissed me goodnight with a tenderness that made me feel more valued than I'd felt in months. Over the next few weeks, Emma and I developed a routine that balanced work and romance perfectly. We'd spend mornings collaborating on her marketing strategies and content development, afternoons exploring Portland locations for her travel series, and evenings enjoying dinners and conversations that deepened our connection. Emma's presence in my life brought a stability and joy that I'd forgotten was possible. The business partnership exceeded both of our expectations. Emma's travel blog audience responded enthusiastically to the Portland content we created together, and several local businesses reached out about marketing collaborations after seeing our work. Within a month, we'd generated enough new contracts to significantly improve my family's financial situation, proving that I hadn't needed Sarah's family connections to build a successful career. Meanwhile, Sarah's attempts to interfere in my new relationship became increasingly desperate and transparent. She'd started following Emma's social media accounts, leaving comments that were just barely professional enough to avoid being obviously inappropriate. She'd also begun showing up at places where she knew Emma and I might be, always with Jake in tow, clearly hoping to create awkward encounters that might destabilize our relationship. But Emma handled Sarah's behavior with a grace and confidence that impressed me. She never responded to Sarah's social media provocations, never allowed herself to be drawn into drama, and never asked me to choose between avoiding Sarah and living our lives freely. Emma's maturity and security in our relationship made Sarah's desperate tactics look even more pathetic and juvenile. The situation reached a climax when Sarah and Jake showed up at a gallery opening that Emma and I were attending for her travel blog. Sarah had clearly dressed to impress, wearing an expensive dress and designer jewelry, and she made a point of introducing herself to Emma with fake friendliness that fooled no one. Jake lingered nearby, obviously hoping to witness or provoke some kind of confrontation. Emma's response was masterful. She greeted Sarah warmly, complimented her outfit, and asked polite questions about her work and interests. When Sarah tried to make pointed comments about how well she'd known me and how much history we shared, Emma simply smiled and said that she was grateful for the experiences that had shaped me into the person I'd become. Her refusal to be intimidated or drawn into competition completely deflated Sarah's strategy. Later that evening, as we walked home from the gallery, Emma told me that she felt sorry for Sarah. She said it was clear that Sarah was struggling with regret, and probably genuinely missed what we'd had together, but that her approach was only pushing me further away and making her look desperate. Emma's compassion for someone who was trying to undermine our relationship showed me exactly the kind of person she was. 6 months later, Emma and I were living together in a beautiful apartment overlooking the Willamette River. Our business partnership had evolved into a full-scale marketing agency specializing in travel and lifestyle brands. With clients throughout the Pacific Northwest, we'd traveled together to several destinations for Emma's blog, combining business with the kind of romantic adventures I'd always dreamed of having. Emma had become close with my family, offering genuine support during the final stages of restructuring our original agency and celebrating our successes with authentic enthusiasm. My parents often commented on how happy and confident I seemed, how much they enjoyed spending time with someone who clearly adored and respected their son. As for Sarah, I'd heard through mutual friends that she and Jake had tried to make their relationship work for a few months before realizing they had nothing in common beyond fishing. Jake had eventually moved on to pursuing other clients for his guide services, leaving Sarah to face the reality that she'd thrown away a loving relationship for someone who'd never been serious about her. The last time I saw Sarah was at a coffee shop downtown, sitting alone with her laptop, looking tired and older than her years. She noticed me but didn't approach, probably realizing that any conversation would only highlight how well my life had turned out without her. I felt a brief moment of sadness for what we'd once had, but mostly I felt grateful that I'd been brave enough to choose happiness over familiarity. Emma and I got engaged on a weekend trip to the Oregon coast at a secluded beach where we'd gone to photograph tide pools for her blog. When I proposed, Emma said yes with tears in her eyes, telling me that she'd been hoping for this moment since our first dinner together. Our engagement felt like the natural progression of a relationship built on mutual respect, genuine compatibility, and shared dreams. Looking back, I realized that Sarah had actually done me a favor by choosing Jake's fishing expeditions over our romantic getaways. Her inability to appreciate what we had together had forced me to recognize that I deserved better, leading me to someone who valued my love and wanted to build a future with me. Sometimes the best thing someone can do for you is show you exactly who they are, so you can make the choice that will actually make you happy. Emma and I are planning our wedding for next spring, and we've already started discussing the travel adventures we want to share as a married couple. She's taught me that real love isn't about convincing someone to choose you over other options. It's about finding someone who sees you as their first choice every single day, without hesitation or doubt. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. This one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.